Welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse. We like to take these deep dives into some pretty complex topics.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be tackling something that a lot of you have expressed a lot of interest in, and that's arcologies.
Oh, yeah.
These massive self-contained cities
Mm-hmm.
that are designed to be eco-friendly
Right.
and super efficient. We've got a stack of articles and research ready to go.
Right.
And so we can really try to wrap our heads around what an arcology is, the vision behind it,
Yeah.
and whether it's actually a feasible solution
Mm-hmm.
to some of the problems we're facing today.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it kind of sounds like a futuristic concept, right? These giant mega cities. But it's actually a response to very real problems that we face today, like urban sprawl
Yeah.
and the environmental impact of our cities.
Right. It's like, can't we actually create these sustainable megacities
Right.
that are good for the planet
All right.
and good for the people living in them?
Exactly.
There's that balance we need to figure out.
Yeah. And I think to really understand arcologies, we have to go back to the architect who really popularized the concept, Paolo Soleri.
Okay.
His book, Arcology, The City in the Image of Man, is kind of considered the foundational text on this subject.
So he's like the godfather
Yeah,
of arcologies.
you could say that.
Yeah. What were some of his core ideas that really set the stage for this whole concept?
Well, one of the things that I think sets Soleri apart is this focus on what he called miniaturization.
Okay.
And he argued that as things evolve from matter to mind, they need to become more compact, to fit more complexity into smaller spaces and shorter time spans.
So it's not just about building big, it's about building smart and dense, right?
Yeah.
Packing more complexity into a smaller footprint.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And he saw this idea of miniaturization applying to how we design cities. And so arcologies, for Soleri, were a way to achieve this, to concentrate urban life in a way that minimizes environmental impact and maximizes efficiency.
It's like a hyper-efficient city
Yeah.
where everything's interconnected and designed to work.
In harmony.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about functionality. Soleri also believed that beauty played a really vital role.
Okay.
He actually had a term for this. He called it aesthetogenesis,
That's aesthetogenesis.
which is the idea that the universe is constantly evolving towards greater beauty and compassion, and that our cities should reflect this process.
So for him, arcologies weren't just about practicality, but about creating something beautiful and inspiring as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And his designs were incredibly diverse and visionary. He envisioned arcologies floating on the ocean, built on stilts above marshlands, even one built into an asteroid.
An asteroid arcology.
Yeah.
That's certainly thinking outside the box, or planet, as the case may be.
Yeah.
But of all of his designs, the one that's actually been built, at least in part, is Arcosanti, right?
Yes, Arcosanti is a prototype arcology. That Soleri began building in the Arizona desert. Back in 1970, it's much smaller than what he originally envisioned. He planned for it to house 5,000 people.
Right.
But currently it has less than 150 residents. So it's not quite the sprawling megacity he imagined. But it's still a tangible representation of his ideas, a place where people can actually experience some of the principles of arcology firsthand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And despite its small scale, Arcosanti is a fascinating place. It has apartments, an amphitheater, workshops for bronze casting and ceramics, even a bakery.
Wow.
And people from all over the world come to visit and learn about Soleri's vision.
It sounds like a living laboratory for sustainable living
Yeah.
and a testament to Soleri's commitment
Yeah.
to his ideas. But moving beyond Arcosanti, what are some other real-world examples of projects
Yeah.
that are drawing inspiration from arcology principles?
Well, there are a few notable ones. Masdar City in the United Arab Emirates is a planned city that's designed to be car-free and completely powered by renewable energy.
That's ambitious.
It is.
And how about the line in Saudi Arabia? I've heard that one is pretty controversial.
It is. The Line is this incredibly ambitious project to build a 106-mile-long linear city in the desert. It's designed to have everything. Within a 5-minute walk for residents, shops, schools, parks, you name it.
Wow, a city that's essentially one giant interconnected building.
Pretty much.
That's a pretty radical concept.
Yeah.
But as with any grand vision, there must be some major challenges in actually bringing these projects to life.
Absolutely. These are huge undertakings that require massive amounts of funding, technological innovation, and political will.
Yeah.
There are also concerns about social and cultural acceptance. Are people actually ready to live in such densely populated, technologically advanced environments?
It's that question of whether the benefits of sustainability and efficiency outweigh potential compromises on
Yeah.
personal space and traditional ways of life.
Right.
It's a complex equation with a lot of variables.
Yeah, and that's where we start to see some of the critiques of the Arcology model emerge. One critic, Eric Hunting from the Peter P. Foundation, while supportive of the goals of Arcologies, questions whether they're actually realistic, given the complexities of human behavior and societal structures.
So he's not necessarily against the concept, but
Yeah.
he's raising some pragmatic concerns about whether we can actually pull it off.
That's right.
Yeah.
He argues that society might not be rational enough to embrace such a radical shift in living. He thinks that the linear city concept, where development is concentrated along transportation corridors, might be more practical and achievable than building these massive self-contained structures.
Interesting. So maybe instead of trying to create these
Yeah.
isolated utopias,
Yeah.
we should focus on making our existing cities more efficient and interconnected.
That's one way to look at it. He also suggests that the ocean might be a better testing ground for arcologies. He argues that there's less bureaucratic resistance at sea, and the challenges of creating a self-sufficient environment are more immediate and obvious.
So it's like starting with a blank slate, away from the constraints of existing infrastructure and regulations.
Right.
Kind of like a frontier for sustainable living.
Exactly.
I like that.
He believes that demonstrating the viability of arcologies in a more controlled environment like the ocean could pave the way for their adoption on land.
It's like, prove it works here,
Yeah.
and then we can talk about scaling it up.
Right.
I like that approach.
And he also emphasizes the importance of building what he calls proto-arcologies and micro-cities,
Good.
smaller scale projects
Yeah.
that can kind of showcase the benefits of sustainable living and provide a tangible improvement in people's lives.
So rather than starting with these massive, intimidating megastructures, you focus on smaller, more achievable projects that demonstrate the value and feasibility of the concept.
Yeah. He believes this approach could help to build public support and demonstrate the practical benefits of arcology-inspired design.
So it's like a stepping stone approach. Start small, prove the concept, and then gradually scale up. Makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think Hunting's critique raises a crucial question. Are arcologies really about these massive, iconic buildings, or are they about a more fundamental shift in how we think about urban design and sustainable living?
That's a great point. Are we talking about a specific architectural form?
Yep.
Or a broader philosophy
Yeah.
that can be applied in different ways?
Right.
Yeah.
It's something to consider as we continue our exploration. And I think it's a question that Soleri himself grappled with. While his designs are often these breathtaking, futuristic visions, his writings also delve into the philosophical and ethical implications of living in a more sustainable way.
It's like he was looking beyond the buildings themselves, towards a new way of being in the world, a more harmonious relationship with nature and each other.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another interesting example, Begich Towers in Whittier, Alaska.
Okay. What's special about Begich Towers?
It's essentially a town under one roof. It's a 14-story building that houses nearly the entire population of the city, along with all of its public services and businesses.
Wait, so the entire town lives in one building?
Pretty much.
That's wild. It's like an accidental arcology, right?
Yeah, you could call it that.
A real-world example of what it's like to live in a self-contained community.
Exactly.
Wow.
Residents have access to everything they need within the building. The school, the post office, the grocery store, even the police station.
Wow, talk about convenience. But I imagine there are also challenges to living in such close quarters with your entire community.
Of course.
Yeah.
There are concerns about privacy and personal space, and the potential for social conflicts. But many residents appreciate the strong sense of community and the convenience of having everything within easy reach, especially during Alaska's harsh winters.
The fascinating case study in the trade-offs between individual autonomy and communal living.
Right.
Kind of a microcosm of the larger questions surrounding arcology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of considering the social and psychological dimensions of arcology design. It's not just about creating efficient buildings. It's about creating communities that are both functional and fulfilling for the people who live there.
I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into arcologies, from the visionary ideas of Paolo Soleri to real-world examples like Arcosanti and Begich Towers. We've also touched on some of the challenges and critiques of the Arcology model and started to explore those broader philosophical questions about sustainability, community, and the future of urban living.
Indeed. And in our next segment, we'll delve even deeper into the design considerations of arcologies, exploring how architects and engineers are tackling issues like transportation, food production, waste management, and energy generation within these self-contained environments.
Welcome back to our deep dive into arcologies. Before we were talking about some real-world examples like Begich Towers in Alaska.
And, all those interesting social aspects
Yeah.
that come into play when you've got, like, a whole town under one roof.
Yeah, it really got me thinking about those trade-offs. Right. You have the potential benefits of community and convenience, but then also those questions about personal space and what it means to live in such close proximity to others.
It's a fascinating social experiment, to be sure. But I think for this segment, maybe we can shift gears a little bit and dive into some of the nuts and bolts of how arcologies actually work. If we're going to create these self-sufficient cities, we have to think about some pretty complex system.
Yeah, it's one thing to dream up these futuristic buildings, but it's another thing entirely to make them functional and livable. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think it's helpful to start with the core principles that drive arcology design. One of the most important is this idea of closed-loop systems, where resources are used efficiently and waste is minimized. So think of it like an ecosystem where everything is interconnected and designed to work in harmony.
So it's not just about cramming a bunch of people into a tall building. It's about creating a system where resources are used responsibly and sustainably.
Precisely. And that means thinking about everything from energy production to waste management to food production, all within the context of this single structure.
That's a tall order.
It is.
How do you even begin to tackle those kinds of challenges?
Well, let's start with energy. A lot of arcology designs incorporate renewable energy sources like solar panels, wind turbines, and geothermal energy. The goal is to generate as much of the structure's energy needs on-site as possible to reduce reliance on external sources.
That makes sense. I mean, relying on a traditional power grid wouldn't really align with that whole self-sufficiency idea, would it?
Not really. And it's not just about the source of the energy, but also about how efficiently it's used. Arcologies are designed to minimize energy consumption through things like smart building technologies and careful planning.
So it's a two-pronged approach. Generate clean energy and use it wisely. Now, what about waste management? How do you deal with the waste produced by, thousands or even millions of people living in close quarters?
Yeah, waste management is another crucial aspect of arcology design. The idea is to minimize waste generation in the first place. Through things like composting and recycling programs, some designs even incorporate systems for treating wastewater and reusing it for irrigation or other purposes.
So it's about turning waste into a resource, closing the loop as much as possible. Okay, now what about food? How do you feed an entire city contained within a single structure?
Well, that's where things get really innovative. A lot of arcology designs incorporate vertical farms, which are essentially multi-story greenhouses that allow for year-round food production in a controlled environment.
Vertical farms. So you're talking about growing food inside the building itself.
Exactly. Imagine entire floors dedicated to growing fruits, vegetables, and herbs, all stacked on top of each other. It's a way to produce fresh, local food without relying on traditional agriculture and transportation systems.
That's amazing. So residents could essentially have access to like a farmer's market right in their building. What are some of the advantages of vertical farms besides just proximity?
Well, because vertical farms are climate controlled, they can actually produce food much more efficiently than traditional agriculture. They're not as susceptible to weather fluctuations or pests, and they can use water and nutrients more efficiently.
That sounds like a really sustainable way to produce food, especially in an urban environment. But efficiency isn't the only consideration, right? I mean, people also need space to live, work, and play. How do arcology designs address those needs?
Well, one of the key principles here is mixed-use development, where residential, commercial, and recreational spaces are all integrated within the same structure. So the idea is to create this vibrant, self-contained community where people can live, work, shop, and socialize without having to travel long distances.
So it's like a mini city within a building with everything you need right at your fingertips.
That's the idea. And a lot of arcology designs also incorporate green spaces, parks, and rooftop gardens to provide residents with access to nature and a sense of openness.
That makes sense, because one of the common criticisms of arcologies is that they might feel claustrophobic or cut off from the outside world.
Exactly. Designers are very aware of that concern,
Yeah.
and they're constantly looking for ways to incorporate natural elements
Yeah.
and create a sense of connection to the outdoors.
So it's a balancing act, right? Trying to create these efficient, self-sufficient environments while also making sure that they're livable and enjoyable for the people who inhabit them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another critical aspect of arcology design: transportation. How do you move people around efficiently within a vertical city?
I was just thinking about that. Elevators can only take you so far, especially in a building with hundreds or even thousands of floors.
Right. Elevators are certainly part of the equation, but they're not the whole story. A lot of arcology designs incorporate a variety of other transportation systems, like horizontal and vertical people movers, which are essentially automated trams that travel throughout the structure.
So like a mini subway system within the building.
Exactly. And some designs also incorporate moving walkways, which provide a quick and easy way to get around on the same level, especially over longer distances.
It sounds like a multimodal approach, similar to what we see in modern cities, but adapted for a vertical environment.
Right. And because everything is so close together, people often don't need to travel very far to get where they need to go. This reduces reliance on cars, which in turn minimizes traffic congestion and pollution.
It's like a city designed for walkability, but on a much grander scale.
Exactly. And of course, many arcologies would also incorporate bicycle paths and pedestrian walkways to encourage active transportation and reduce reliance on motorized vehicles.
So it's a holistic approach to transportation, taking into account efficiency, sustainability, and the well-being of the residents.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about the human element here. All of these systems and technologies are designed to support people, and we need to consider the social and psychological impacts of living.
It's just a unique environment.
That's a really important point. We've talked about the practical aspects of arcology design, but what would it actually be like to live in one of these structures? How would it affect our interactions with each other, our sense of community, even our mental well-being?
Those are complex questions,
Yeah.
and there are no easy answers. Some people argue that living in such close proximity could foster a stronger sense of community and increase social interaction.
So it could be like a built-in neighborhood where you're
Sure.
constantly bumping into people you know. Exactly. But others worry that it could lead to feelings of overcrowding, a loss of privacy, and increased social pressure.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a concern. It's like the ultimate test of neighborliness.
Mm.
And what about access to nature? We talked about incorporating green spaces and rooftop gardens, but can they really replicate the feeling of being,
Yes.
the natural environment?
That's a valid question. While arcologies can incorporate natural elements, it's unlikely that they could fully replicate the experience of being in a truly wild and open space.
It's hard to beat a hike in the woods or a day at the beach, no matter how many rooftop gardens you have.
You're right. And that's why some experts believe that arcologies might be better suited for specific types of people, those who are maybe more comfortable with urban living and who value convenience and efficiency over privacy and wide open spaces.
So it's like any other living situation, different strokes for different folks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Some people might thrive in an arcology environment, while others might find it stifling. And ultimately, I think, the success of any arcology project would hinge on how well it addresses the social and psychological needs of its residents.
I think that's a key takeaway. We can't just focus on the technological
Yeah.
and logistical challenges.
Yeah.
We also need to consider the human dimension.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a more speculative aspect of arcologies, those really outlandish designs that kind of push the boundaries of imagination and explore the possibilities of living in extreme environments.
Think about ocean arcologies, subterranean cities, even space habitats, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Those concepts that sound like something straight out of science fiction.
Right.
Yeah.
And while these designs might not be feasible in the near future, they force us to think creatively about how we might adapt to different environments and overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. They're like thought experiments that can inspire new ideas and technologies.
Okay, so let's hear about some of these wild and wonderful arcology concepts. What kinds of ideas are designers coming up with?
Well, let's start with ocean arcologies. Paolo Soleri himself designed a number of these, some floating on the surface, others submerged beneath the waves. They often incorporate systems for harvesting energy from waves and currents, desalinating seawater, and even farming seafood.
Underwater cities. Now, that's a concept that really
Yeah.
captures the imagination.
It does.
Yeah.
And these designs explore the idea of creating self-sufficient communities that are in harmony with the ocean environment, rather than trying to dominate it.
It's like taking the concept of a cruise ship and turning it into a permanent, sustainable habitat. Now, what about underground arcologies? What are the advantages of going subterranean?
While underground arcologies are often envisioned as a way to escape harsh climates or conserve land resources, they would require artificial lighting and climate control systems, but they could offer protection from extreme weather events and minimize disruption to the surface environment.
It's like creating a whole new world beneath the surface. Makes me think of those underground cities in science fiction movies.
Exactly. And some designs even incorporate underground greenhouses for food production, using artificial light to mimic sunlight.
So it's about creating this self-contained ecosystem that's shielded from the elements. And then there are the space arcologies, the most futuristic concept of all. What are the unique challenges of designing for life beyond Earth?
Well, designing for space is incredibly complex. You have to consider things like radiation shielding, creating artificial gravity, and developing closed-loop life support systems that can recycle air, water, and waste.
Wow, it's like designing a miniature Earth in a bottle.
It is. And while we might not be building space arcologies anytime soon, these designs push the limits of what's possible and force us to confront the challenges of sustaining life in extreme environments.
You know, what I find so fascinating about all these arcology concepts, whether practical or seemingly far-fetched, is that they spark our imagination and challenge us to rethink our relationship with the planet and with each other.
I agree. They force us to ask some fundamental questions about how we want to live, how we can create more sustainable and resilient communities, and what the future of humanity might look like.
And on that note, I think we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into arcologies with a look at the future of this fascinating concept. Welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse. We've spent this episode in the world of arcologies, these massive, self-contained cities, that are designed for ultimate sustainability and efficiency.
And I think it's safe to say we've really covered a lot, haven't we? From Paolo Soleri's kind of like visionary ideas to some actual real-world examples out there, the nuts and bolts of arcology design, and even some of those like almost fantastical concepts. The ocean arcology is underground cities, even space habitat.
It really has been quite a journey. But as we kind of wrap up here, I'm curious, what do you think about the future of arcologies? Do you think we'll actually see these megastructures become a reality, like in our lifetime?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, it's so hard to say. There are just so many factors at play, Technological advancements, economic feasibility, political will, societal acceptance. It's complicated.
So it's not just a matter of if we can build them, but should we? And are people actually willing to live in them?
Right, exactly. And, on the technology front, we are seeing incredible progress in areas like renewable energy, vertical farming, sustainable building materials. But I think we still have a long way to go, before we can create truly self-sufficient systems that can support, thousands or even millions of people.
And the economic side of things, these projects must be incredibly expensive to actually build.
Yeah, they are, for sure. Finding the financial resources to fund these mega projects, that's a huge hurdle. It would probably require massive collaboration between governments, private investors, communities.
It's like, trying to align the stars. You need the technology, the money, the political will to actually make it happen.
Right, exactly. And even if we could, overcome all of those challenges, there's still that question of public perception. Are people ready to embrace this kind of radical shift in how we live?
Right, because it's one thing to, admire these futuristic designs from afar, but it's a totally different thing to imagine actually living in them, right?
Well,
There are those questions about privacy, personal space, even just the psychological impact of living in such a densely populated environment.
absolutely. And those are definitely questions that, designers and architects need to carefully consider. If arcologies are going to be successful, they have to be more than just efficient machines. They have to be places where people can thrive and feel connected to their community, to nature.
So it's not just about building impressive structures. It's about creating spaces that are, both functional but also human-centered.
Exactly, and I think that's where we're starting to see, like, a shift in the conversation around arcologies. There's this growing recognition that these projects have to be approached holistically, taking into account not just the technological and economic aspects, but also the social, the cultural, the psychological dimensions.
Right, because it's like that saying, we can't just build our way out of our problems, right?
Yeah.
We need to think about how these structures will affect the people who live in them and how we can create communities that are, both sustainable but also fulfilling.
Yeah, and I think that's where the real potential of arcologies lies, not just in their ability to, like, address environmental challenges, but also in their potential to kind of foster new ways of living and interacting with each other.
It's almost like a social experiment on a grand scale, right?
Yeah.
An opportunity to explore different models of community and sustainability.
Exactly. And you know what? Even if we never actually build these massive structures, the ideas behind them, the emphasis on efficiency, closed-loop systems, and community-oriented design that can still inform how we approach, urban planning and development in the future.
It's like a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
The thinking behind arcologies can influence how we design cities, even if those cities don't end up looking like, those futuristic visions of Soleri or other architects.
Precisely. And I think that's a really important takeaway from, our deep dive here. Arcologies, they're fascinating in their own right, but they can also serve as this catalyst for like these broader conversations about sustainability, urban design, and, the future of human habitation.
I think that's well said. And on that note, it's probably time for us to wrap things up here. We've covered so much in our exploration of arcologies, and I hope, our listeners have come away with a better understanding of this very complex and intriguing concept.
Yeah, me too. It's been a fascinating journey, and I'd encourage everyone to continue exploring this topic and thinking about like the possibilities of sustainable living, whether it's in arcologies or in other forms.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into arcologies. Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like more thought-provoking deep dives into a wide range of topics, you know what to do. Subscribe to 15-Minute Discourse wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help us out. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.